Recently, my grandfather passed away. Cancer's a bitch. My grandfather was an interesting man, to say the least. He was your usual redneck recluse, living in a rickety old house, driving a rickety old pickup truck around the rickety old town, only when absolutely necessary, sitting at his rickety old desk carving rickety old wood ornaments. We still hang them up on our Christmas tree. He fed the feral cats and wild skunks out on his front porch, and somewhere buried in my room, I have a picture of him feeding a fox a raw hot dog. He seemed to do just about everything and anything he wanted to. It's been about 2 months since he passed, and my family is still going through his old stuff. We've found a whole lot of weird shit, which is to be expected. 6 dowsing rods, guns of all shapes and sizes, even a vintage Confederate flag. And no, I have no idea where he got it, and I don't want to know either. But the strangest thing was this. He collected a lot of books, and nearly all of them I recognized except for one. It's called The Plague Towns, by someone named Ava Schmidt. It seems to be the only copy that exists because I can't find anything about it anywhere. Not an Amazon listing, not a Wikipedia page, not even an obscure 4chan post. Nothing. Here's what the summary blurb on the copyright page says. Written by survivor Ava R. Schmidt. The Plague Towns documents the origins and chronological timeline of the 2041 CWDH virus outbreak in North America and the trials of infected and healthy alike. 2041. The current year is 2025. I don't understand how my grandpa even got this book, but I can't just not talk about it, even if nobody believes me. The following is the first chapter of the book. I'll be posting the entire novel in pieces here for as long as it takes. I don't know what else to do. I would say enjoy, but honestly, it's pretty fucking weird. Sincerely, Quinn. The Plague Towns by Ava R. Schmidt. Chapter 1. Maxine. If you know anything about viruses, you'll know the name Ketum Cave. Located in Kenya's Mount Elgon National Park, it is known for its intriguing history and jagged beauty. For centuries, countless animals native to the area, elephants, buffalo, even hyenas, have ventured inside, scraping the salt-rich walls with tooth and claw, desperate for the briny goodness. A minor pleasure in their short lives. Lives inflicted, like ours, with tragedy, just on a smaller scale. Hunger, struggle, plague, death, the list goes on. And just like our own experiences, the small things make those tragic lives much more palatable. So, when those animals, and the locals and tourists that come into contact with their sweat and blood and fluids and feces, visit Ketum Cave, it's easy for them to only expect the small joys and wonders. That's why no one suspects the sickness, the bad things, could come from there. At least, that is what's to be assumed about the 2 unlucky people who contracted Marburg, one of the deadliest diseases in the world, while inside. It's a wonderful example to keep people humble. Even the good places, the places where you'd find even the smallest amount of joy, are dangerous. You just can't see the danger, and you'll never know it has latched onto you before it's too late. But most people aren't humble. Most people don't know about Ketum Cave, or Marburg, or even basic hygiene. Most people are a little stupid. That stupidity caused COVID-19 to grow so large, so out of control. It's funny how so many intelligent people knew a pandemic was coming for years, and yet those in power and those below them alike didn't seem to care. Then the ball started rolling, and people started dying, and those same intelligent people said, "I told you so. Are you going to actually listen to me now?" They listened for a while. Then they thought that just because the pandemic stopped, they didn't have to follow that advice anymore. That another plague wouldn't follow and overshadow all the ones which came before it for good. Maxine Lovell was one of them. "So, what are you getting Jared for Christmas?" Maxine rolled her eyes as she pinned her phone between her shoulder and her ear, barely keeping the slippery thing from sliding out and hitting the squeaky clean tile. "I don't know yet," she said, heaving a milk carton from the grocery store fridge. It smelt of old rot and freezer burn. "I keep asking him, but he just keeps shrugging and saying, 'I don't know, surprise me.' Stevie keeps saying the same thing." Becca's voice was shrill, and as Max fought the urge to rip the phone from her ear, her friend clarified, "Well, not that exact thing, but you know what I mean. I swear, once guys turn 30, it's like they turn into rip-off macho men." Rolling her cart towards the checkout, she said, "Look, I've gotta go, but I'll see you on Wednesday, right?" "Yep, your house at 7, right?" Max made a little uh-huh noise, and after a quick goodbye, she hung up and shoved her phone in her purse. Lugging her things up onto the conveyor belt, she couldn't help but smile at the dark-eyed cashier, just barely holding back sleep. He almost reminded her of her dad, with that scraggly beard and crow's lines. "Long shift? Like you wouldn't believe," he sighed. "You been hearing about this shit?" "About what?" He pointed up at the old box television in the corner, the signal weak and sound choppy as it clung to a news station for dear life. She barely managed to read the fuzzy headline, "Yellowstone facing lockdown." "The volcano?" she asked, eyes wide. "Nah, they've been saying there's some virus out there in the woods, killing deer or something." "That's too bad." "For the deer." They both chuckled. As she loaded up her cart again, Max couldn't help but listen to the television. "The head of the Department of the Interior has released a statement telling the public not to worry and that the iconic park will be reopened in the following weeks, once the infected populations have been dealt with. However, he warned citizens living in all counties surrounding Yellowstone to be on the lookout for animals with..." The signal flickered out as Max pulled out her credit card. "Would you like to use your reward points?" the cashier asked dryly. "No, what do you think it is? The virus. Probably rabies or something, I don't know. There's all sorts of scares all the time. Remember when they shut everything down because of that anthrax thing?" She nodded. "And it ended up completely fine. This'll be the same thing. Wasting our tax money for nothing but some bullshit. Yeah. Max waved goodbye, strolling away with her cart. "Have a good night," he waved back, and that was that. The multicolored glow of Christmas lights sparkled down on her in the dim parking lot as she loaded her bags into the back of her aging van, its black paint beginning to chip. But as she finished up and started towards the driver's seat, she couldn't help but notice the sound of crunching ice and snow behind her. Turning around, she was surprised to see a small fawn staring back at her, its giant eyes frozen in awkward panic. But to her surprise, as Max took a step towards it, it didn't move. Max grinned, taking another step, and another, until she was inches away from the poor, quaking fawn. Everything she heard before in the grocery store vanished, as she couldn't help but ponder what a magical moment this was. She'd only seen deer running across the road like demented madmen or grazing in the far distance. But this really was magic. She reached out her hand, feeling the strange texture of its nose as it sniffed her fingers. It was wet, excessively wet. As she ran her palms under its chin, scratching it like a cat's, she barely noticed the strange protruding grooves and bumps under its short, starchy fur, or the way its skin hung loose on its bones. "You're so cute," she cooed. "Where's your mama, sweetheart? How'd you get..." Her fingernails suddenly scraped hard against something. The fawn let out a pained yelp she'd never heard out of any animal before. It took off farther down the parking lot and vanished into the dark, stumbling over its own feet. Max looked down at her hand, a strange grainy feeling tickling at her fingertips. The remains of bloody scabs and drool swallowed her hand whole and dripped down her sleeve. Bile crawling up her throat, she swallowed her disgust as best she could and wiped the strange goop off onto her jeans, taking the hand sanitizer out from her purse and rubbing it hard into the folds of her hands. Then she got into her van and drove away, wondering what to make for dinner. As she pulled into her garage, she couldn't help but notice a paper cut on the hand she pet the deer with. Must have gotten it at work. An hour later, the fawn would collapse in the infinite snow, taking shallow breaths as frothing yellow saliva spewed from its mouth. Its teeth were grinded into mere stumps, and its chin and underbelly and hooves ached with painful blisters and sores. It let out one last yelp, desperate for the comfort of its mother, and then fell silent. It had come from Yellowstone, the modern Keetum. Monday. The aching woke Max up. It was in her jaw, her teeth too. Massaging the sore spots as she dragged herself to the bathroom, she couldn't help but glance at her phone. 5:21 a.m. it read. The sun hadn't even come up yet. Coughing, she felt something goopy and sticky crawling up her throat from deep within her chest. Max coughed and hacked until finally she spat into the sink as hard as she could. Wiping the snot from her dripping nose, she saw a thick, yellowish-green blob splattered across the crystal-clean porcelain. It almost reminded her of discolored jelly. "Hun?" Jared walked over, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "You okay?" Yeah, I'm fine. I think I've just got a cold or something." Washing the gelatinous gob down the drain, she splashed water on her face, trying to wipe away the sweat. In the back of her brain, she could feel the familiar burn of a fever beginning to kindle. "You want to stay home?" No, I'll be fine. I'm just gonna try to get some more sleep." Jared nodded, and the two of them walked to bed together, his arm around her damp shoulder. Hours later, and Max wasn't any more well-rested than before. Sluggishly, she got ready for the day and drove to work, almost hitting a stray mailbox as her mind wandered off. By the end of the drive, she'd run out of the tissues she'd kept in her car, snot seeping from her nostrils like a thick slime. Wiping her nose with her shirt, she stumbled into the local post office, touching nearly everything as she did. 9 o'clock. Max said hi to her co-workers, Penny and Anthony, as she grabbed a new box of tissues from the storage closet. They were also invited to her Christmas party. She touched 59 letters and 7 packages within the hour. 10 o'clock. Max grabbed another tissue box as Penny and Anthony exchanged worried whispers. Whenever she wasn't paying attention, she grinded her teeth. Her skin grew pale. She touched 94 letters and 16 packages within the hour. 11 o'clock. Max had gone through 2 more tissue boxes. As she carried a package across the office, her coordination became worse than before, and she tripped. As Penny checked her for injuries, she couldn't help but notice how red her gums and nose looked. She touched 41 letters and 3 packages within the hour. 12 o'clock. Max took her lunch break early after Penny suggested she take things easy. But try as she might, she couldn't get much down. Just half a banana and a couple crackers. Swallowing was difficult. Minutes after gulping down the last drops from her water bottle, she vomited into the break room trash can. Solid chunks of food still visible in the upchuck. She didn't touch any letters or packages then. Just everything else. The puke was the final straw, and Max reluctantly went home, Jared picking her up. By midnight, all the tissues in the house had been used. Tuesday. Max barely slept, fever dreams flashing her from unconsciousness and cold sweats. She vomited twice before the sun rose. When Jared checked up on her that morning, having stayed in the guest room to not catch anything, he couldn't help but notice traces of blood within the yellowish-green upchuck. "No," she wheezed when Jared suggested taking her to the hospital. We can't. You know we can't." "But, Jared, no. I'll get better." She was suddenly interrupted by a coughing fit, and as Max reached into the trash can once more, he knew that she was right. They could barely keep up with house payments. How would they pay for a hospital visit? Max stayed in bed all day, the only exception being the multiple trips to the bathroom. Around noon, Jared had to put headphones on to block out the continuous sounds of vomiting and hacking and sneezing. It was a constant chorus of suffering. Nevertheless, he did all he could. He ran out to the grocery store to grab more tissues. He replaced garbage bags. He hung up decorations for the Christmas party and prepared as much food as he could manage. He even made Max's favorite soup, but she couldn't keep that down either. "I still haven't got you a Christmas present," she weeped as he cleaned up the bile spillover. "It's okay, hun, it's okay." Jared kissed her. Her skin was on fire, the ugly taste of sweat meeting his tongue. He almost gagged himself. "It'll be okay. Don't cancel the party, please. I'll be better then." "I wasn't going to." Good. Wednesday. More snot. More vomit. More blood. Through the waxing and waning of Max's consciousness, she could feel pain in every single bone. A strange burning all across her skin. Her teeth felt jagged and her gums raw. Opaque ropes of saliva dripping down her cheeks and onto the stained mattress. Every time she closed her eyes, it felt like her brain was about to explode. She could hear talking, laughing, even drunken singing outside her bedroom door. The Christmas party. "Where's Max?" Becca's voice drifted through the walls. "Laying down. She's sick," Jared said. "Shit, that's too bad." Suddenly, Max felt a sharp, stinging pain in her lower torso. She let out a sharp, mucus-muted moan, trying to crawl out from under the covers. But it was too late. A warm wetness spread down from her underwear all the way down to her socks. Still getting up, she threw off her soaked pants only to see something worse. Giant, scabbed-over blisters slowly started bursting open again. Black and blue and red and yellow and covering every inch of skin. Then she took off all of her clothes, each missing layer revealing more and more of them. Her back, her upper arms, her stomach, even her breasts. They were everywhere. Panicked spittle came dripping down her chin, mixing with snot and watery bile as she staggered towards the bedroom door, completely naked. Her vision went blurry as she felt the world spin around and around and around. She couldn't stop grinding her teeth together, harder and harder as they snapped and her gums buckled under the pressure. A blister on her back popped open, dense pus bursting out like hot water from a geyser. Max toppled through the door and tumbled into the living room, uncaring of all the eyes staring back at her. Her gaze locked onto Jared's. "I think I'm really sick," she croaked. Without another word, vomit spewed from her mouth and onto Anthony, everything her body had left spilling onto the hardwood floor. Blood, pus, stomach acid, everything. She collapsed onto her knees, her lungs screaming for air as it just kept coming. No room to breathe. And then... bam! Max fell face first into her own mess. Dead. Maxine Lovell was 67 pounds when she died. Her last recorded weight a week earlier was 145. The CDC-sent coroner wasn't sure what the hell happened. Neither were the EMTs who drove her to the hospital, the nurses that sprinted her through the emergency room halls, or the doctors that tried to restart her heart. But they all knew whatever happened to her was deadly. A little over 50% of her skin was covered in blisters. Her teeth had been grinded to a third of their original size, the blood vessels in her gums rupturing from the near-constant pressure. The protective linings of her stomach had sloshed off and dissolved. Most, if not all, of her organs had failed. The insides of her nose and throat had become so raw you could see muscle. still occasionally twitching as rigor mortis took control. Her lungs and heart had slaved away until they were sore and exhausted and begging for the suffering to end. And her brain? The coroner prided himself on having a strong stomach. What remained of Max's brain changed that for good. As the coroner finished drawing a blood sample and locked away the body for later examination, leaving his shift early to cope with whatever the hell he just saw, there was a tiny knocking against the door of the corpse cabinet. No one heard it over the all-consuming hum of the air conditioner, but it was indeed there. The knocking got louder and louder, monotone groans and rumbles echoing out from inside, but nothing could break the lock. In a random waiting room, one of the doctors who treated Max comforted Jared to the best of his ability. The boyfriend was sobbing uncontrollably. "I don't understand," Jared cried. I don't know how... He paused, reeled his head back, and sneezed. Thick snot trailed out from his nostrils. Jared was pronounced dead 4 days later. Chapter 2. Transmission. The Monday Maxine went to work at the Red Lodge postal office, she touched 194 letters and 26 packages. In total, that's 220 contaminated objects. About 89% of those letters and packages were local deliveries, but the others? 11 arrived in New York City, 4 in Houston, 7 in Chicago, 1 in Miami, and 1 in Phoenix. These are among the most populated cities in the United States of America. All contaminated. All infected. It wasn't long before strange cases started to be reported in Wyoming, New York, Texas, Illinois, Florida, and Arizona. Then the states surrounding them too. Strange, thick snot dripping from children's noses, teenagers letting out hard, hacking coughs, adults vomiting and pissing themselves at work, the elderly grinding their dentures down to thin stumps. It was all there. Hospitals begged for help from the government, but they simply brushed it off, stating they had more pressing matters to worry about. 2.5 weeks after Maxine's death, a press conference was held with President Davidson. A reporter asked if he planned on addressing the health scare spreading across the country. The president proceeded to blame the scare on drugs, hopping over the Mexican border, and ranted about how pregnant women were taking Tylenol for 5 minutes. Nothing of actual use was said. In the last moments of the conference, he sneezed. His tie was stained with thick greenish yellow snot. And that's not to mention the people at Maxine's Christmas party. Anthony was on a flight to California to visit family when his headache, one he'd had persistently since the day before, suddenly began to pulse and throb, like his heart had moved up to his brain. He figured it was just another one of his migraines, but he finally became concerned when he had rather unpleasant diarrhea in the airplane bathroom. It was bubbly, like greenish-brown sparkling water. It smelt like death, too. It was 3 a.m. when he threw up in the middle of baggage claim, and soon enough, he was in a first aid station, sneezing and coughing his lungs out. He was admitted into a nearby hospital about an hour later, unconscious from the pain. His family visited him, and his mother gave him a kiss on the cheek, something she always did when he was sick. His sweat tasted sour. He died 2 days later. During the cremation, someone swore they could hear him growling inside the furnace. Anthony's mother got a bad cough in the middle of the funeral service. Meanwhile, Penny was at home, trying to stay hydrated as she withered on her couch. It was stained with piss and shit, but she was so out of it she didn't even care anymore. All she wanted to do was stay inside and quarantine. Whatever she had she didn't want anyone else to get it. She wouldn't let herself be a vector. The infomercial on her television babbled on about some useless nonsense as Penny felt something growing under her chin. Brushing her fingers against the tender flesh, she winced as something slick met her touch. Sweat, but something else too. Pus. A second later, the pimple burst. White juices sprang across her discolored pajamas. Then it began to bleed. Nonchalantly, Penny tried to rub away the mess with the back of her hand, her eyes growing heavy. I just need to wipe it off, she told herself. Penny shut her eyes, and her body went limp. On her coffee table, her phone began to ring. It was her sister, Jackie. She'd been trying to contact her ever since she heard about Maxine's death. In fact, it was all over the local news. No one had ever seen this kind of disease before. Eventually, Jackie came over to check on her, using the spare key Penny kept under her doormat. Approximately 2 minutes later, the nearest 911 center received this call. 911, what's your emergency? Hello? Is anyone there? Something's wrong with my sister. Oh, okay, honey. Can you tell me what's happening? She's bleeding. She's bleeding everywhere. Has she been attacked? Where are you? I'm hiding in the closet. I don't know what's wrong with her. She hadn't been answering my calls. I just wanted to check up on her and I don't know what to do. Oh, God. I've sent police and medical to your address, miss. They should be arriving in 10 minutes. Now, has your sister been attacked? I don't know. She tried to attack me when I came in. Oh, no. Miss, is there any way you can get out of... No, God, please, no, Penny, no, oh, God. Hello? Miss? When the police arrived at Penny's residence, she was nowhere to be found. The only evidence she had ever been there were the bodily fluids smeared all over her home. Jackie's corpse was found in the bedroom closet, completely mauled and unrecognizable. The coroner had to identify her via dental records. Then there was Becca and Stevie. They went missing about 3 to 4 days after coming into contact with Maxine. All their belongings had been left at home, including their phones, keys, wallets, even shoes. The backyard door had been left wide open. Their dogs, Sol and Luna, were found unharmed and adopted not long after. They're still alive today. Imagine how many people Anthony, Penny, Becca, and Stevie interacted with before they passed or went missing. Imagine how many things they touched. Just imagine. Now triple how bad you think it was in your mind. We were all dead, and we didn't even realize it. Chapter 3. Micah. It's about time I talk about myself. I'm sure you know who I am, or at least have heard my story. The sole survivor of the Amtrak evacuation disaster in 2034. Ava Regina Schmidt, then Ava Regina Whitlock. Native of the Midwest of the United States, or formerly at least. To think, before everything happened, I was celebrating my 21st birthday and downing shots with my friends. I met a lot of people during the 3 days or so I was stuck on that train. They all had names, families, stories. Stories that deserve to be told. It's not like they can tell you themselves. That is what the majority of this novel is dedicated to. The stories of those I met, those I watched suffer. I hope I can bring honor to those who lost their lives to save mine. They deserve it. Let's start with Micah Claridge. I remember how I first met Micah with surprising fondness. We were about an hour or two into the train ride, and everyone was still completely silent. We had all just escaped a horror none of us could have imagined, so it made sense, and yet I still felt awkward. Not even the terrors of the zombie apocalypse could beat my social anxiety. But then I heard him crying, and I knew I had to step in. Sitting next to him, I was honestly surprised to see how young he was. He still had that childish baby face and giant, watery blue eyes. And as he cradled his dinosaur-themed backpack in his lap, I couldn't help but notice how stuffed it was, the zipper barely able to close the gap. In fact, he had 2 bags. The other was a proper suitcase hidden under his seat. It was clear his parents packed that one. Hey man. I tried to sound as gentle as I could, although admittedly I probably sounded pretty shit too. My throat was stripped raw with how much I'd screamed at the train station. You okay? The question made him cry harder. I looked around, trying to see if anybody looked remotely like his parents, but all I saw were blank, staring eyes. Surely, I thought, if his parents were here, they'd be sitting with him, right? I started looking through my purse for some tissues. My hands were shaking, and I hoped he didn't notice the blood on my hoodie or the smell of rot stuck to my clothes. Finally, I found some spare napkins I'd shoved into one nook or another and handed them over. As he wiped his nose, I made sure to pay attention to the snot. It wasn't that thick, curdled goop the infected had. He was healthy. After a few minutes, he managed to calm down enough to say thanks, and as I nodded and went to walk away, he grabbed my arm. For a little kid, his grip was pretty damn tight. "Where are you going?" he sniffed. "I'm just getting my stuff. I'll be right back, I promise." Immediately, he stood up. "I'm coming with you." "Why?" You're nice. I don't want you to get eaten." I laughed. God, I shouldn't have laughed, but the thought of this scrawny kid protecting me from ravenous zombies, it was less realistic than the dead walking the earth again. Then I realized he probably didn't want to be alone. I was the only one out of my shock enough to actually approach him. His grip tightened, and I nodded. "Okay, it's a few cars back. Stay close to me and keep an eye out, all right?" He nodded back. "Let's go." Then we left. Most of everyone who'd got on the train had gathered in the 2 first-class cars. There were only 15 of us, including myself, and each first-class car had 38 seats, so there was plenty of space to go around. But many of us hadn't gotten onto the train through those cars. I'd hopped into the 7th with a few others, and in our shock, most of us had left our stuff there too. I was the first to go back. The train was deathly quiet as we made our way through, only the hum of its electric motors to keep us company. Through the gore smeared across the windows, I saw a lush forest. Sunlight malted across the thick grass, and I could have sworn I caught a glimpse of a deer in the undergrowth. It was so peaceful and beautiful. And then I focused back on the blood and remembered why I was here. Why I was on that train. The Amtrak Lux Nadios 1, 2, and 3 were the first of their kind. Running on solar power during the day and electricity during the night, these 3 trains had just completed construction when they were snatched up for evacuation use by the military. Each of them crossed the entire width of the United States and stopped in each state capital, with 1 covering the northern part of the country, 2 covering the middle, and 3 covering the southern. 2, the train we were on, stopped at Raleigh, Richmond, Charleston, Frankfurt, Nashville, Little Rock, Jefferson City, Lincoln, Topeka, Denver, Cheyenne, Salt Lake City, Carson City, and finally Sacramento, and the ride was a total of 100 hours from one end to the other, including the 30-minute minimum stops at each capital. That's 4.5 days on the same train. We'd all gotten on at Raleigh. Richmond was only 30 minutes away by the point Micah and I left for the 7th car. The sound of a harsh thud echoed through the cabins, and an alarm began to ring throughout the train.
"Warning,"
an automated voice echoed.
"The train has hit what appears to be a human being. Please pull one of the emergency brake levers and notify law enforcement immediately."
Micah looked up at me with those big blue eyes again, and in a stray beam of sunlight, I noticed the blood staining his pale blonde hair. "Are we actually going to stop?" he asked, grabbing onto me again. I couldn't answer as I looked up at the screen the warning was blaring from. Each train car had 3 screens bolted to the ceiling, 2 on the ends above the connecting doors and 1 in the middle. They showed the last snapshot the train's front camera had taken of whatever it hit. Despite the digital distortion, I could tell it was human. An older woman with ratty hair and no clothes. She was a biter. At least, that's what my father called them. I could tell from the raw of her skin. Something had pecked her eyes out. Probably a crow or some other scavenger. The poor thing had been dead long before the train hit her. If everyone has enough common sense, I finally responded. No. Does everyone? Yeah. I couldn't bear to say I didn't know. Continuing forward, the train looked so strange. I'd never been on too many before, but when I had, they were so full of people. To see that many empty seats made my heart sink. Micah seemed just as uncomfortable, the silence growing heavier with each vacant car. Eventually, we found my belongings. a dark gray suitcase, and a heavy-duty backpack. Bits of flesh had dried on the wheel of my suitcase where I bashed someone's head in. It was the only way to keep the biters down. Then Micah pointed ahead, to the very back of the car. I followed its direction and immediately felt the pit of hunger in my stomach. He spotted the snack cart. "Nice job," I said. He grinned. "It's got candy." "Yeah, here, you can take one, okay? We've got to save what we can. We can rest here and eat, and then we'll wheel this off to the others." He nodded and hurried giddily towards the cart, snatching a large Kit Kat and tearing it open not even a second later. I pretended not to notice him pocketing a Hershey bar for later as I grabbed my own snack. I liked Twix the best. For once, I relaxed as we sat down. Our candy was gone in an instant, and as I stood up to grab the cart, he asked, "Could we keep resting? Just for a little." "All right, 5 minutes. What's your name?" "Micah. What's yours?" "Ava." His eyes lit up. "I had a friend named Ava." "Really?" "Yeah." He pulled out a birthday card from his bag, handing it over to me. It was also dinosaur-themed. On the front, a cartoon T-Rex wearing a party hat held out a present, showing off his teeth as some text read above, "Have a dino-tastic day." "She gave that to me." "How long ago was your birthday?" "Like a week ago. My mom said it was special 'cause it's my golden birthday, turning 8 on the 8th. I opened up the card. Inside, it read in messy cursive, 2/8/34. "Happy birthday, Micah. I hope Mr. and Mrs. Claridge got you that dino stuff you wanted. I couldn't find it at Walmart. I can't wait to see you again at school when quarantine's over. Love, Ava Lemmings." "Did you get the dino plush?" I smiled. He nodded and dug through his backpack, eventually pulling out a small teal velociraptor. "Her name's Vicky." I gave the stuffy a polite wave. "Nice to meet you, Vicky." "Nice to meet you, too." Micah spoke in a high-pitched tone, moving the velociraptor's head around as if it were speaking. "You know what I can do?" "What?" "This." Suddenly he threw Vicky into the air, and I barely caught the stuffed animal in time, handing it back over to him. "I can jump 10 feet. Then, using his normal voice, he whispered, "Velociraptors really could, you know." "I bet. So, how was your birthday?" Immediately he went completely pale, but before I could say anything else, a shrill scream rang out from the distance. "Stay behind me," I snapped, and we ran toward the scream. Not the smartest move, now that I think about it. It was about a year after I relocated to Perth, Australia, that I had the courage to start writing about what happened on that train. It was a suggestion from my therapist. If I wrote about my experiences, maybe it would be easier to work out the trauma. Then, slowly, that spiraled into this. A published retelling for all to read, all to consume. Micah never told me the gritty details of what happened before he got on that train. So, when I started my research, I tracked down as much as I could find about those missing pieces. Footage, audio recordings, text exchanges, all of it. I understand why he didn't tell me much now. Micah lived with his mother Sarah, his father Frank, and his younger sister Tori, just outside of the small town of Fairhope, Alabama. Sarah and Frank were home renovators, with their last project being their own home, the former plantation house, Rothschild Manor. The Claridges were by far one of the wealthiest families in the area, and being that wealthy, they could afford many, many security cameras, all with crystal clear imaging and audio. They could also afford a giant birthday party. The day was February 8th. Balloons and streamers were strewn about the manor. The foyer was filled with open presents and the kitchen stocked with treats and drinks of all kinds. And in the backyard playing were dozens upon dozens of small children. Activities had been set out, the playground cleaned up and the cobwebs dusted away. And Frank and Sarah had even bought a bouncy house obstacle course. And right in the middle of it all was Micah. 1 o'clock. Micah and 3 other children, who have been identified as Ava Lemmings, Will Pirano, and Kaylee Morgan, were playing cornhole on the southwest part of the yard near the playground. "I can't believe they closed school," Will said, tossing a beanbag. "What, you're seriously sad?" Kaylee cocked her head. Yeah, I was looking forward to reading Mr. Popper's Penguins. Bro, you can read that anytime you want. No, I can't. I don't have the book. Ava shushed the both of them and focused. A moment later, she tossed her bag. It was a slam dunk. Yes! She grinned, jumping up and down. Micah, did you see that? He nodded shyly, holding Vicky close to his chest. Hey, Kaylee said, taking a sip from her juice box. Why is school even closed anyways? I checked the calendar. There's no holidays for weeks. Except for Valentine's Day, Will added. Only couples celebrate Valentine's Day, not schools. Dad said a bunch of people are getting sick. Ava shrugged. It's cold season. Kaylee nodded, looking like an off-kilter bubblehead. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Did you see Mr. Montez on Tuesday? He was sneezing his head off. Finally, Micah spoke. I think Zach was coughing too. Did you invite him? Yeah, he's not here though. All of a sudden, shrieks could be heard on the other end of the backyard. Switching cameras, the lens struggled to focus as kids ran around like headless chickens. Some screaming and crying for their parents, while others took cover in the obstacle course. Finally, the footage became clear, and a bloodied, vomit-coated man could be seen staggering up the hill toward the party. He was later identified as Richard Hildebrandt, the Claridge family's closest neighbor. Hildebrandt's wife, Clara, was found long dead in their home by a Mexican search group in April of 2039. She'd locked herself in the master bathroom and killed herself via a bullet to the head. It appeared she had been quarantining herself in the master bedroom and connecting bathroom for weeks before her death. Immediately, many of the parents started hurting their children inside. Not all of them. Some were still hiding. As Frank ran over to the sick man. Rick, what happened? Are you... Frank didn't get to finish as Richard collapsed onto the ground. Before Sarah would grab Micah, the boy ran over to his father's side, his eyes gleaming with both concern and morbid curiosity. What's wrong with him, Dad? Get inside, Micah. I've got him, Sarah said, grabbing Micah by the arm. Where's Tori? In her crib. Keep an eye on her and Micah. I'm calling 911. As Sarah and Micah ran inside, Frank could be seen checking Richard's pulse with one hand and fumbling with his phone with the other. The following is a transcript of his 911 call. 911, what's your emergency? My neighbor just crashed my son's birthday party. He's real rough looking. I think we'll need an ambulance. Okay, what's your address? 304 Wilson Street. Jesus, I don't feel a pulse. I'm sending medical now. Do you know how to perform CPR? I'm a bit rusty, but... Fuck, Ricky, what the... Shit, no. Stop, Ricky, please. Ricky! Sir, what's happening? Sarah, help! Sarah! About 96 seconds into Frank's call, one of the backyard cameras caught something strange. Not only had Richard come back from the dead with surprising strength, but about 7 corpses were climbing up the hill and sprinting toward the house. One went for the obstacle course, another for the playground, and the rest broke down the manor doors and raced inside. 1:05. About 13 parents and children are immediately ambushed and torn apart in the kitchen. Screams echo as those who remain run for their lives. Many get lost in the manor, unsure of its layout, and were eventually cornered. Others barricaded themselves in bedrooms and bathrooms, but that didn't do much good either. The number of dead were growing, and as they retained their muscle memory, and many of the doors didn't have locks, well, you can imagine. In the chaos, the foyer camera picked up Micah and Sarah. His mother flung open a cabinet and shoved a dinosaur backpack full of supplies into his arms, grabbing her own suitcase at the same time. It was her idea to make emergency kits in case something happened. Go, Sarah shouted, flinging open the front door as she snatched her car keys. But what about Dad and Tori? Just go. They'll catch up. The pain on Sarah's face was obvious. Then they ran. Outside, Kaylee's screams could be heard inside the playground as she crawled through its plastic neon tubing. The zombie of the local bartender hot on her tail. Eventually, the screams turned into a shrill screech, and then silence. Her juice box lay abandoned in the grass. In the downstairs kitchen, Will scurried into a cabinet just moments before an unidentified zombie rushed into the room. It searched for a while and left for easier prey. Will then tried to open the cabinet door and found that it somehow became locked or jammed. He never escapes. Ava managed to break open a window in a guest bedroom and ran toward the nearby forest. A zombie gave chase instantly. With such little legs, there was no way for her to ever win that race. Then, there was Tori. I don't want to talk about Tori.